Hello, everyone. My name is Emily. I am 25 years old, and I have been dating my boyfriend Tyler, who is 27, for about 2 years now. We met back in college when I was working two jobs to keep myself afloat, and he was living off the allowance his parents gave him. Despite our different upbringings, I thought we had built a real relationship. I come from a family that owns a small hardware store in our town. My parents built it from nothing, and as a kid, I spent weekends helping them stock shelves, ring up customers, and later, as I got older, handling deliveries and doing inventory. When I started college, I worked as a waitress to pay for books and food. I am not ashamed of that at all. In fact, I am proud of the hustle because I learned independence and responsibility. Tyler, on the other hand, grew up in a very different environment. His parents, Linda and Charles, are upper middle class, the kind of people who send their kids to summer camps abroad and hire tutors without thinking twice about the cost. Tyler's older sister Megan is 30, married with two children, and she has always been compared to me, though in the most backhanded way possible. What I noticed right away is that Tyler is the golden child in that family. Megan could do everything right and still be criticized, while Tyler could do almost nothing and still be praised. Charles is obsessed with his grandkids, but constantly nitpicks Megan about how she raises them. Linda has this soft spot for Tyler that crosses the line into blatant favoritism. The running joke during family dinners is that Tyler can do no wrong, while Megan is always the one getting picked apart. That dynamic has always been uncomfortable, but Tyler tends to shrug it off and say, "That's just how my parents are." The incident that brought me here happened last weekend. Tyler suggested we all go out to dinner with his parents, and he specifically chose the restaurant where I currently work part-time as a waitress. I immediately felt uneasy about it. The last thing I wanted was to sit at a table in the same place where I serve food every week, surrounded by coworkers who know me in a very different context, while also sitting across from people who I knew did not respect that job. I tried to say no, but Tyler insisted it would be fine and that his parents would behave. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When we arrived, everything seemed normal at first. The restaurant is a nice place, casual but still upscale, and I had worked that morning shift, so I was already a little tired. We were seated at a large table, and the waiter, who happens to be one of my friends, greeted us warmly. Things were going fine until Linda's eyes landed on the specials board. My name was written on it because I had been Employee of the Month for covering extra shifts and handling a particularly chaotic evening with a smile. Instead of acknowledging it in a supportive way, Linda chuckled and said, "Oh, look, Charles, it is like we have a celebrity with us, the waitress of the month." Charles laughed along and added, "Guess we will get the best refills tonight, huh?" They were not saying it in a proud or light-hearted way. They said it as though I were the punchline, and the entire table burst into laughter. I sat there trying to force a smile, but inside I felt small. Tyler just looked uncomfortable and did not say anything to stop them. I tried to brush it off, but it did not end there. When one of my coworkers walked by with a tray of soup, Linda leaned in dramatically and said in a stage whisper, "Make sure Emily does not spill the soup. She is family now." Charles slapped the table laughing, and Megan gave me an apologetic glance, but stayed quiet too. Everyone else chuckled except me. I felt my face burning, but I told myself not to ruin the evening by reacting. I focused on my food, but they kept slipping little digs here and there about how I must know all the staff's secrets, or how Emily should jump behind the counter and help out if things get busy. Tyler just smiled nervously every time they said something, never once telling them to stop. By the time the meal ended, I was more than ready to go home. Then the bill arrived. It was around $280, which was not surprising given the place. Linda slid the bill toward Tyler and said, "Split it 4 ways, right?" I was confused and asked, "Wait, why 4 ways?" She gave me a look as though I were being unreasonable and said, "Well, you ate too, dear. Everyone should chip in." That was the breaking point for me. I had sat there being laughed at for my job in the very place I worked, and now they expected me to cover part of their expensive dinner bill as if I had not already paid my dues working in that restaurant week after week. I took a deep breath and calmly said, "I am not splitting the bill after being mocked all night for working here." I have already given this restaurant enough of my labor." The table went silent. Charles finally broke the tension by snorting and saying, "Well, someone is touchy." Tyler shifted uncomfortably and quickly offered to cover my share, but I shook my head. I pulled out $40 in cash, enough to cover my meal and drink, and placed it neatly on the table. Then I pushed my chair back and said nothing else. The rest of them had to divide the remaining amount 3 ways. That night, Tyler's parents called him to say that I was entitled and disrespectful. They claimed I embarrassed them by refusing to split evenly, when in reality, they had spent the entire dinner embarrassing me. When Tyler told me about the call, I could tell he was torn, but then he admitted he thought I had overreacted. That cut deep. I reminded him that he had sat there silently while his parents mocked me and then allowed them to expect me to pay a share of their fancy meal, as if nothing had happened. I told him if he cannot defend me from his parents' mockery, maybe I am with the wrong guy. A few days after the dinner disaster, I was still feeling raw about the whole situation. I kept replaying it in my head, the way Linda's laugh had cut through the dining room like she was the queen of comedy, the way Charles smirked as if I had been foolish for even being offended, and most of all the way Tyler just sat there in silence. I knew he was uncomfortable, but the silence stung more than their jokes. It felt like he had chosen not to stand next to me when I needed him most. I kept telling myself that 2 years of a good relationship should outweigh one bad night, but the weight of that silence did not leave me. Then out of nowhere, I got a text from Megan, his sister. We are not especially close, mostly polite around each other at family events, but she asked if I wanted to grab coffee. My stomach dropped because I could not tell if this was going to be an ambush or an olive branch. I said yes, because honestly, I wanted another perspective. We met at a little cafe downtown, the kind of place where they write latte art in the foam. Megan was already seated, and the moment I saw her, I realized this was not going to be about small talk. She looked tired, like she carried years of frustration behind her polite smile. We ordered drinks, and then she leaned in and told me that what happened at the restaurant was exactly what she had expected from their parents. She called it classic mom and dad. She said they did the same thing to her husband all the time, teasing him about being a high school teacher, asking him how it felt to settle for a job that would never pay 6 figures, making little digs at holidays and family dinners. She told me it was relentless. As she spoke, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I was not the only one who noticed their cruelty, but dread because this meant it was not an isolated incident, it was a pattern. Megan admitted that she usually stayed quiet just to keep the peace. She described family dinners where she would bite her tongue while her husband's jaw tightened and the kids squirmed in their seats. She said it wore her down over the years because silence became the easiest way to survive, but at the cost of her own voice. She looked at me then and said she had been impressed when she heard about what I did at the restaurant. She told me that I stood up for myself in a way she had never managed to do, and that she respected it more than she could say. It was strange hearing that from her, because I had always thought of Megan as the responsible, put-together one, the one who had already learned how to handle her parents. Hearing her admit that she still felt cornered by them made me realize how deep their influence ran. She did not stop there. She told me very plainly that if I married into this family, I was going to be their permanent punching bag unless I set boundaries now. She explained that once they sense someone will put up with their jabs, they never stop, they just dig deeper. She said they would keep pushing me into a role where my background, my job, and even my worth were all reduced to running jokes. She told me her husband had been stuck in that role for years, and it had taken a toll on their marriage. Sitting there, listening to her, I felt my chest tighten. I thought about the early days with Tyler, back in college when none of this mattered, when we would sit in the library together and share cheap coffee, when he came to visit me at the hardware store and kissed me behind the aisles, telling me how impressed he was with how hard I worked. I thought about how good it felt then, to believe that we were equals, 2 people building something together. But now I was starting to see the cracks, the way his silence in the face of his parents' mockery might not have been a one-time thing. The way Megan laid it out, I could see the map of my future if I stayed. I imagined holidays filled with little barbed jokes at my expense, with Tyler shrinking in his chair instead of defending me, with me walking out to cry in the bathroom while they laughed at the table. I thought about the way they treated Megan's husband, how years of those digs had dulled him into someone who endured instead of someone who thrived. And then I thought about myself, about whether I was willing to let that happen, or whether I was going to let this dinner incident be the turning point where I decided I deserved better. Megan looked at me with a seriousness that made the hair on my arms rise. She said, "If you marry into this family, you're going to be their permanent punching bag unless you set boundaries now." That honestly gave me chills. When Tyler showed up at my apartment a few nights after the coffee with Megan, I could tell before he even opened his mouth that something was off. He looked tense, like his shoulders were carrying the weight of the entire world, and his eyes wouldn't settle on me. He sat down, fidgeting with his hands, and finally told me that his parents had called him earlier in the day. According to him, Linda and Charles had decided that I was not marriage material. Their reasoning? That I did not come from money and that I had humiliated them by refusing to split the bill at the restaurant. Hearing those words out loud hit me like a cold slap. I stared at him, trying to process not just the cruelty of his parents, but also the fact that he was repeating it back to me instead of defending me. I asked him as directly as I could, "Do you agree with them?" And the silence that followed was louder than anything. He hesitated far too long enough for me to see the truth before he even spoke. Then, almost under his breath, he muttered that he just wished I had handled it more gracefully. In that moment, it was as if the ground shifted beneath me. Gracefully. That word echoed in my mind like a taunt. Gracefully, as if allowing myself to be mocked was supposed to be part of the deal. Gracefully, as if quietly absorbing their jabs about my background and my work was the mark of a good partner. Gracefully, as if standing up for myself was somehow a character flaw. That was the moment it became crystal clear. Tyler and I were fundamentally incompatible. I looked at him, the boy I had loved for 2 years, the boy who used to sit across from me in the library with a goofy grin, the boy who once kissed me in the hardware store aisle as if he admired everything I stood for. But now here he was, asking me to be smaller for the sake of his parents' comfort. I told him as plainly as I could that what he wanted was a girlfriend who let his parents humiliate her, and that was not me. He stared at me with a mix of frustration and sadness, but neither of us argued. We broke up on the spot, the kind of breakup where there are no screaming matches or dramatic ultimatums, just a hollow realization that the future you imagine together has no foundation. When the door closed behind him, I felt a strange cocktail of emotions. Heartache, because the relationship had meant something to me. Anger, because his silence at that dinner table had meant even more. And, strangely, relief, because for the first time in weeks I felt like I had chosen myself instead of letting someone else define my worth. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, trying to distract myself by folding laundry and scrolling on my phone, when suddenly my phone rang. It was my manager from the restaurant. My heart immediately dropped because I assumed I had messed up a shift or forgotten something important. Instead, she told me that Linda had actually called the restaurant earlier to complain about me. According to her, Linda claimed that I had been rude to her during their dinner and that it reflected poorly on the restaurant. My jaw literally dropped. It was one thing for her to humiliate me in person, but to take it a step further and try to sabotage my job was a level of pettiness I had not even anticipated. Thankfully, my manager knows me well. She knows how hard I work, how I cover extra shifts, how I show up on time and treat customers with respect. She told me not to worry, that everyone on staff had seen what really went down, and that they were rolling their eyes at Linda's so-called complaint. She even laughed a little and said it was obvious who the problem really was. As I hung up the phone, I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but underneath that embarrassment was something stronger. I was mortified, but also relieved they had my back. Since the breakup, I have been single, and to my surprise, I feel lighter than I have in a long time. It is as though I had been carrying around a weight that I never fully acknowledged until it was gone. For 2 years, I had been trying to fit myself into a family dynamic that was not designed to welcome me, bending in small ways to make things easier for Tyler, swallowing small slights. and ignoring the sense that his silence in the face of their mockery meant more than either of us admitted. Walking away left a hole, yes, but it also left space for me to breathe. The most unexpected part of all this has been Megan. After that coffee we shared, she and I started texting more often, little things at first, but then longer conversations about our lives, about what it meant to stand up for ourselves, and about the strange comfort of finding solidarity where you least expect it. She even invited me to her daughter's birthday party, and I went last weekend. It felt warm and easy to be around her family, watching the kids laugh over cake and balloons, seeing her husband beam with pride as he carried plates of pizza. For once, I felt like I was in a family space without having to be on guard. That peace did not last long, because Charles and Linda arrived midway through. The moment they saw me, their faces twisted into a mixture of surprise and irritation, like I had appeared uninvited at some exclusive event. I was standing near the gift table when I heard Charles lean toward Linda and whisper under his breath, "Is she stalking us now?" What they did not realize was that Megan was within earshot. She immediately straightened, looked directly at them, and said that she had invited me, that I was her friend, and that I was welcome there. The silence that followed was heavy, and the look on their faces was priceless. It was as though they had never considered the possibility that their daughter might openly contradict them, much less side with me. They muttered something about having another obligation and left early, practically rushing out the door with forced smiles that fooled no one. Standing there, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication, because for the first time someone inside their family structure had not only supported me, but openly challenged their behavior. Sadness, because it underscored what Tyler had never been willing to do. Megan had defended me without hesitation, while Tyler had hesitated long enough to make it clear that his loyalty was to their comfort, not my dignity. For those wondering if Tyler and I reconciled after all this, the answer is no. He sent me one text asking if I wanted to talk things over, but I ignored it. I had already seen enough. Later, Megan told me that his parents were actively trying to set him up with the daughter of their golf buddies, someone with the kind of background they approve of, someone they describe as more their type. That stung at first, but in truth it only confirmed what I already knew. I was never going to win with them, because the game had been rigged from the start. The entire ordeal forced me to confront something that had been simmering beneath the surface since the first night I sat across from his parents. I do not want to marry into a family that treats kindness and hard work like a punchline. I spent years working in a hardware store, putting myself through school with waitressing shifts, and there is nothing shameful about that. If anything, it is something to be proud of. I have decided to embrace who I am fully, waitress uniform and all, because the right people will see the value in it instead of mocking it. If choosing that path means I sit through fewer overpriced dinners with self-important in-laws who think the size of their wallets defines their worth, then I consider that a victory. So here I am, a little bruised, but standing taller than I was before, grateful for the people who did show up for me, and determined to save my energy for the kind of love and family that feels like a safe place instead of a battlefield. Thank you for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, please leave a loyal like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Do you think I did the right thing by breaking up with Tyler, or was I wrong to walk away when his parents were the real problem? AITA?